Today from the Global Lane, jailed for 9 years simply for defending her faith. Pakistani Christian Asia Bibi, she's free in Christ, but will she soon be free from prison? Just released at Foggy Bottom, this year's International Religious Freedom Report, there's one big change. Spygate and obstruction of justice charges agitating in Washington. African Americans, how do they break free from politics as usual? Radio host Sunny Johnson shares her thoughts. These stories and my commentary. And it's all right here, right now from the Global Lane. Imagine wasting away in a Pakistani prison for nothing more than defending your Christian faith during a heated argument with Muslim co-workers. Well, that happened to Asia Bibi. The Christian mother was in prison 9 years ago and convicted of committing blasphemy against Muhammad. The punishment is death, but Bibi has one more chance for justice. For several years, the Pakistani High Court has repeatedly delayed hearing her appeal. And joining us with more from London is Wilson Chowdhury. He's president of the British Pakistani Christians Association. Wilson, good to see you again. Now, I know there were some reports several weeks ago that Asia's appeal will be heard soon, but what is soon? Has any date been set? Give us an update.
Well, no dates have been set yet, and how soon is now. When you're dealing with the Pakistani legal court system, justice system, you're talking about periods between 6 to 1 year would be described as short. So it's very hard to say, but my indications would suggest that the court hearing will be within the next 6 months.
Well, it's now been 9 years, Wilson. I don't think any Pakistani has served a longer time in prison on blasphemy charges. So why is Asia still in prison?
Well, Asia Bibi has been, an outcast in her entire society now. I mean, the entirety of Pakistan comes out to protest every time there's a court hearing for her. She is anathema. She's hated by people up and down the country simply for saying the words, "My Christ died for me. What did Muhammad do for you?" Which, in any sensible person's imagination, doesn't mean more than a question. She is serving the longest sentence ever known for blasphemy. Most blasphemy victims are released at high court stage. The high court judges were too fearful to release Asia Bibi, and during their hearing, they said that her conviction would remain because of technical issues. They never ever clarified what those technical issues are. I mean, we've got this chance at Supreme Court hearing, and the new Chief Justice is definitely a man who is more egalitarian in his approach to law. He's already set up a special office now in the Supreme Court of Lahore, in which Christian applications for appeals, etc., are now going to be fast-tracked and reviewed in a different manner than others because of the noticeable prejudices that occur in the judicial system.
I've met Asia's family several times. Asia's daughter, Isham, has always voiced optimism, Wilson, that her mom will be released. So how is Asia and her family holding out?
Well, as well as they can. Their mother's been incarcerated for 9 years. She's missed birthdays. She's missed weddings. So Asia herself will have felt extremely isolated and secluded. I mean, this woman has been almost in hibernation for 9 years, hardly ever seeing any faces, with the occasional visit from her family members. And I can't imagine how much of an impact that would have on the children. I mean, being away for that long from your mother during some of the most sensitive years of your life, it has to be difficult. And Isham's a brave girl, as are the others. But I can imagine, despite what they say, they have really missed their mother over this period of time. And they will be overjoyous once she is released, just as many other Christians who have been calling for her freedom will be. I mean, it will be a day of great elation.
Well, I know earlier this year, on that note, there was some rare good news about a Christian who was jailed 2 years ago on blasphemy charges. Then he was freed. Tell us briefly about 32-year-old Usman Liaquat.
Yeah, Usman Liaquat was a very brave man. His sister-in-law was suffering from severe harassment in her college by a group of boys. Initially, he went to the parents, and the parents actually managed to silence the boys for some time. But eventually, the boys regained their bravado and started harassing his sister-in-law and other Christian girls, it should be said. So Usman, and one day while Usman Liaquat was going to work, they accosted him, told him to refrain from getting involved in their harassment and to let them continue doing what they were doing, to which Usman's reply was, I'll go to the police and make sure an FIR is registered, a charge is registered against you if you continue this action. Because when they heard this, the boys beat him. He was advised to go to the police station to report the crime, to protect others from a similar beating. Whilst there, he was then accused of blasphemy and had to serve 1 year, 9 months as a blasphemy convict. What transpired is, over a period of time, through the negotiating skills of his solicitors, who obviously advocated for him in court, he was able to set himself free on the basis that there was absolutely no evidence against him. But the police in Pakistan don't need to have evidence. They simply need to have the words of a Muslim against a Christian to place them in prison and incarcerate them take them away from their freedom.
Yeah, that happens a lot there. So what can we do for Asia Bibi and our Pakistani brothers and sisters in Christ who are up against these charges and face this situation every day? What can we do?
Well, firstly, we need to speak to our governments. The US government is getting more involved in the situation in Pakistan. I remember when Donald Trump, I believe he still has suspended foreign aid funding to Pakistan until they improve their poor human rights record. Britain is intervening more, so are various other Western nations. Already, obviously, we're now hearing about a Supreme Appeal Court hearing for Asia Bibi. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said this wouldn't happen. But things have changed, and I believe it's down to international pressure. So we know this can work. And again, what we've got to do is trust in God. Each and every one of us must pray and pray for change, not only in the government and the way they think in Pakistan, but in the way that mass society in Pakistan operates. No longer should they see Christians as pariahs or as individuals outside the normal human sphere, if that makes sense. That's often how Christians and other minorities are viewed.
Okay, a lot of praying then is needed there for Christians in Pakistan. Wilson Chowdhury, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gary.
Each year, the U.S. State Department releases its report on international religious freedom. The report names countries of particular concern where religious rights are violated. This year, there was one big change. Jenna Browder has more.
In 1998, then-Senator Sam Brownback helped champion a law to create an ambassador for religious freedom. Today, he holds that position and is ready to take action by going beyond simply releasing an annual report.
We must move religious freedom forward. We must defend it in every corner of the globe. And that's why the Secretary is hosting the first ever ministerial on advancing religious freedom.
This ministerial, we expect, will break new ground. It will not just be a discussion group. It will be about action. We look forward to identifying concrete ways to push back against persecution and ensure greater respect for religious freedom for all.
A key goal for the event will be to convince how countries hurt themselves by not allowing people to freely worship.
You have less terrorism if a country is religiously free, because people then can express their faith and instead of fighting you through terrorism. And this is in now all the economic and the scientific data.
Today also marked the release of the latest International Religious Freedom Report, highlighting problems in countries like Russia, Iran, Afghanistan, and North Korea. While Brownback believes naming and shaming these countries is important, he admits some type of punishment, such as economic or humanitarian sanctions, should follow.
We're pushing them forward.
To show his priority to the cause, Secretary of State Pompeo called it an international human right and said he was very intentional about making the July event his first opportunity to host international foreign ministers. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Joining us with more from Washington, D.C. is Eric Rosales. He's our national security correspondent. Eric, the ministerial meeting is a big change this year. So whose idea was this summit? Was it Trump, Pompeo, Brownback, both of them? I know Pompeo and Brownback are longtime friends from Kansas.
Most definitely. They are certainly very good friends. And I would have to say that it is a combination between Pompeo and Brownback. You know, what's interesting about this summit is the U.S. is going to be able to present data that they have to these foreign countries to show them that there is a direct tie between terrorism and religious freedom.
I know Brownback's really big on that, but does he really think the foreign ministers of offending nations will change their thinking just because of one meeting in Washington?
Well, I asked him that question. I actually had a 20-minute conversation with him, a one-on-one interview, and I asked him, I said, come on, is this really going to bring some sort of change? He says, the data that we're going to be presenting to them is going to be able to show them that there is a direct tie between terrorism and religious freedom. And if they want to keep the very brightest of what they have inside the country, keep them there so that they can be able to grow the economy, they are going to listen to this data.
Yeah, and I know in places like Egypt, the Christians really contribute to that society.
They certainly do.
An important part of it economically. So many of our viewers, Eric, as you know, are concerned about the persecution of Christians. But it seemed Ambassador Brownback was especially concerned or touched about human rights violations against the Rohingya people of Myanmar. Right. And many of them are refugees now in Bangladesh. They're Muslims. But Brownback even called what is happening to the Rohingya ethnic cleansing. He seems their situation touched him. He has grave concerns for them and their future. So tell us about that.
Yeah, he actually did. He says that he's visited a number of the refugee camps over there, but that one touched them in particular, just the heinous crimes that are being brought against them. And you know, that's, I think, what's important is that he wants to see religious freedom, not just for the Christians, but also for the Muslims and others out there, the Coptic Christians that we've seen so much persecution against. This is a person who wants to bring religious freedom throughout the world.
So what other countries got his attention this time and why?
Well, we saw in the report North Korea actually has 100,000 or so plus Christians. And we also have in Saudi Arabia. He says that is definitely, he wouldn't give me specifically what countries are going to be invited, but he did say Saudi Arabia is going to be getting a ticket because as of right now, the Crown Prince there, he's somewhat of a kind of a rock and roll superstar in Saudi Arabia. He is one that is starting to bring change. We've seen how women are being able to drive now.
Critics of this annual report, Eric, say it really doesn't do much to change the behavior of countries designated as religious freedom violators. So how does Brownback respond to that one?
Well, I asked him that very same question, and he disagreed entirely with that. He says naming and shaming countries is important, but he also wants to bring sanctions. I said, you know, naming these countries is great, but you need to be able to have some teeth to be able to bring some change, real change to these countries. And he agreed with me, and that is why he is looking at possibly economic sanctions or humanitarian sanctions will be brought against some of these countries who are committing these atrocities against not only Christians, but other religions out there, people who are in the minority.
Yeah, this president, he's one who really doesn't hesitate to impose sanctions if they're necessary. So I guess Eric Rosales, we'll have to wait and see if Sam Brownback and the ministerial meeting can make a difference. We appreciate you. Thanks for keeping us on top of it.
Thank you so much, Gary.
President Trump calls the placing of an FBI informant into his 2016 presidential campaign Spygate. He says it's a deep state scandal worse than Watergate. Well, joining us with some insights is former political consultant for the Trump campaign, Sam Nunberg. Last March, Mr. Nunberg testified before a federal grand jury as part of Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian campaign collusion. Sam, thanks so much for joining us today. So when you worked on the campaign, did you ever have any contact with alleged FBI informant Stephen Halper?
No, not at all. I did not have any contact, nor did anybody in the FBI try to contact me. However, a good friend of mine, Michael Caputo, believes that there were other FBI informants trying to co-opt him and infiltrate through him.
Oh, so what do you think of the President's Spygate claim? So do you think there's something to it then?
Look, I certainly do. And I think that we have to look at this from a longer point of view, from a subjective point of view. And unfortunately, I had to read James Comey's book because I've been called to the grand jury and I'm at least a cooperating witness. They certainly considered the Trump campaign, Donald Trump, to be mafia, to be mobsters. And even if you look at the way Robert Mueller is treating Trump associates, he's treating us like we're the mafia. Interestingly enough, that is an arbitrary and capricious decision by Mueller and Rosenstein, because, you know, even with Robert Mueller, I always love to point to the fact that when he ran the Boston U.S. Attorney's Office, he let Whitey Bulger get away with murder, literally and figuratively. And then you have the FBI, who looks at Trump with such contempt, much like much of the Republican Party does, by the way, such as people as John McCain and the Bushes. And you have them trying to infiltrate the campaign to set up a case where they were then going to prosecute Donald Trump. Because remember, James Comey has said, and he even has, when he talks about the multiple political calculations he made during that election, he said that he assumed Hillary was going to win. So first they proved the Russians did it. Then they're going to say the Russians delivered the election. Then they're going to say Trump knew about this and wanted this. And therefore, Trump was part of this grand conspiracy and he should be impeached. So it was very, very important when Clapper on his book tour, he then says, he makes a statement that in his calculation, the 75,000 votes or 80,000 votes that separated Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, which I believe was divine providence from God, but he believes that those Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those 3 states, were all delivered to Trump. This is what Clapper said, were all delivered to Trump because of Russian Facebook ad buys. If he actually believes that, and he was the director of national intelligence, it's very, very scary, because that is so rudimentary, simplistic, and frankly, stupid. It's like a grade level analysis to give, that it would scare me that this guy was the director of national intelligence. But to tell you the truth, he doesn't believe that. He's lying. And going to his book, if you look at what Comey's book says, Donald Trump, he's just contemptible. He doesn't have the ethics, and he's not right to hold the office of the president. So that's their narrative there. And then you have Clapper's book saying the Russians delivered him the election. They're also going to try to get Michael Cohen to flip to go after President Trump's finances. And once again, Mueller, Sessions, and Rosenstein are treating Donald Trump like he's a mafioso figure. They like to say they have prosecutorial discretion. No, this is selective, it's arbitrary, it's capricious. They don't like him, they don't think he should be in the office, and they think that they know better than you and me, we that voted for him.
What do you think of these reports that have come out recently that Mueller is now investigating possible obstruction of justice on the part of the president concerning Attorney General Sessions and his recusal from that Russia investigation? Where do you think all that's going to lead? What do you think of it?
That's another avenue they're trying to go. They're trying to find anything. It's the kitchen sink strategy of trying to find any way to impeach Donald Trump. Donald Trump is entitled, as President of the United States, constitutionally, to have any discussion with Jeff Sessions. He is entitled to ask Jeff Sessions to unrecuse himself from this investigation. Whether Sessions should have recused himself at all, I don't believe he should have, because why would Sessions, and this goes to the way Democrats and Republicans are, and Sessions, for a reason, was always a backbencher in the Senate. Loretta Lynch should have recused herself from the Clinton investigation, right? Anybody with any sensibility. So why would Sessions have to recuse himself? But in any sense, he recused himself from the whole thing. And there is no problem for Trump to ask Sessions to reconsider that decision, because that decision greatly affects the presidency. This is the same government that went and attacked the Tea Party. They used the IRS to target the Tea Party. This is them. This is what he's up against.
The black unemployment rate in America has reached a new all-time low of 5.9%. And for Hispanics, unemployment is down to 4.9%, 0.1% above a previous record. President Trump says he kept a promise to help create more jobs in minority communities, and tax cuts are helping small business owners in inner cities and throughout America. So why don't more black and Hispanic Americans support Trump? Here with some thoughts is Sunny Johnson. She's a conservative and host of Sunny's Corner on SiriusXM's Patriot Channel. She also is founder of DidSheSayThat.com. Sunny, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So why don't more minority voters support the president?
I like to give conservatives the answers in kind of a way that makes more sense to them. So the way I can explain this is, if I came to you and you're a pro-life conservative, and I said, if you give me back your tax cut, then abortion will be illegal in America. It will never be able to be challenged again. It would never be able to be put on the books again. It would just be illegal. Most pro-life people would make that trade, make that sacrifice. Well, that's what you're dealing with in the Black community. The finances of it, the economics of it, are not as important as getting what they deem the most important issue facing the Black community today, and that's racism. And that's institutionalized racism, not just individual to individual racism.
Well, I know Jesse Jackson says the president is an advocate for white supremacy, but not too many years ago, he praised President Trump for a lifetime of service to the African Americans. So where is this idea that Trump is a racist coming from?
Well, personally, I feel that it comes in the lapse in the time when Trump decided to run for president and his time to actually engage with the Black community. If you go back and you look at hip hop and all the hip hop artists that have praised Trump, the reason they did it was they were praising his success. They were praising his entrepreneurship. They were praising his ability to be a boss, to run his life, to build his brand. And that's the thing, that golden goose that the Black community is trying to reach and trying to get to. And it was all encompassed in Donald Trump. That is capitalism. That's where Trump should have went when he started his campaign. Instead, he listened to the Republican advisors that told him that the best thing to do was to go to the Black church.
How would you characterize the current state of race relations in our country? Better or worse than before?
It's difficult to answer that question because I think conservatives sometimes don't let themselves become aware of how bad the situation is in the Black community, while individually we are finding our way out. And if you look at like the unemployment rates, our unemployment rates in the Black community began to come down under George W. Bush's tax cut. That all is wrapped around conservative principles. And that's where we need to put it so we can make sure those principles and those ideas stay firmly in track. You have an entire generation of Black people who understand how bad things got, who understand how close we got to the brink of total destruction. And we are trying to self-correct. It would be really nice if we had a conservative movement that recognized that and at least met us halfway.
So how strong is this movement right now that is going against the grain and against the way it's always been?
The Black community knows that something is wrong. They can't put their finger on it because they're still being ruled by Democrats. They're still being ruled by a progressive ideology. They cannot put their finger on exactly what is wrong, but they know that there is a problem within their community. And just shouting it was the Democrats without explaining how that came to pass, how that came to be, is not a winning solution. And in order to do that, you have to know history. All of history. So you can explain how this progressive cancer was put into the Black community and how it has metastasized for over the last 60 to 80 years. Until we can get into that conversation, at least amongst conservatives, there will be no safe space for Black people to actually come into this movement. So they can know that something is wrong. They can actually want to change. But if there's not a table for them to have a seat at on this side of the aisle once they make that change, then no matter how we hope and wish everything to change and be different and we actually save our country, we're going to run into more of these roadblocks of talking about racism and sexism and homophobia and xenophobia. We're going to keep having those frivolous conversations until conservatives decide that the grown-up conversation is over here and it should include Black people that were normally kind of off the list for conservatives' acceptance. We stand for limited government, small government, republic-style government. That means a government closest to the people. Well, right now in the Black community, the government that is closest to the people are a progressive government. Stop telling the people in those neighborhoods that there's not a problem with progressivism. Stop telling them that the problems that they see are made up or non-existent or are not something that should be complained about. Because the problems that they are facing are a progressive ideology that seeks to squelch every sense of individuality, every sense of entrepreneurship, every sense of economic empowerment, and those things need to be pulled out of their root. If we want to affect affect the Black community, we must understand what we stand for as a republic, and that is a government closest to the people. If you really want to affect the people, then start going to those communities and attacking the governments that are closest to them.
Okay, Sonny Johnson, host of Sonny's Corner on SiriusXM's Patriot Channel. I believe it's on every Saturday at 1 p.m. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The revival of Roseanne Barr's show Roseanne was deemed a huge reboot rating success. More than 25 million Americans watched the first episode, and television broadcasters were suddenly excited. In this day and age of Netflix, Hulu, and video streaming, maybe, just maybe, people could be enticed to watch broadcast television again. The networks planned other show revivals, but Roseanne Barr's newfound success was fleeting. Her tongue got her in trouble. This time, it wasn't for her ear-shattering, screeching rendition of the national anthem. Remember that one? Back in the 1990s, when Barr's original program was a #1 hit, there was no Twitter. If someone made racist or controversial comments, it was generally in the privacy of their own home or in conversations among friends or relatives. No more. Everything we say in 2018 on Twitter or other social media is like advertising our views on a billboard. If you're Donald Trump or Roseanne Barr, your tweets are viewed by millions of people around the world. So when Roseanne Barr said former Obama administration official Valerie Jarrett was the baby of Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes parents, ABC's president of entertainment, Channing Dungey, said she'd had enough with that. Dungey fired Barr and canceled her show, saying Roseanne's Twitter statement is abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with our values. I'm sure Barr regrets that tweet. She later apologized to Jarrett, those who work on her show, and to the American people. Her Ambien-induced 2 a.m. tirade will cost her and the cast of the new Roseanne show millions of dollars. And it taints her reputation, not only in Hollywood, but around the world. We're told in the book of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 34, that the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And in the book of James, we're told in chapter 3, verse 6, that the tongue is like a fire. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire. And in verse 8, no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Roseanne, you've made millions of us laugh, but that tweet was no laughing matter. It was pure poison. And whether it's Roseanne's tweet, those of other celebrities, or those that come from our own mouths, let's be careful what we say and follow the wisdom of Solomon stated in Proverbs verse 8, making sure that all the words from our mouths are just and none of them crooked or perverse. Well, that's it from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.